This is Stark, and in this video we are looking at the events of the Korean War. So last video we saw about the causes of the Korean War, and this time we are going to look at the actual events which took place between 1950 and 1953. So when Stalin first gave the green light for North Korean troops to cross the 38th parallel, they did so with immediate effect on the 25th of June 1950. Now this was extremely surprising in Washington, and it took the Truman administration only hours to conclude that the US would retaliate. Now this retaliation was done fairly quickly for two reasons. Now the first one was that US had troops stationed in Japan, and this was a fact that Stalin seemed to have overlooked. And the other one was because they had this support of the UN, and we went into this support a lot in our previous video about the causes, but essentially it was because Stalin had recently been withdrawn from the UN after he had protested against his refusal to seat the Chinese communists. Now this meant that Stalin wasn't able to veto any of their decisions. However, despite the fact that they were able to respond quickly, the defence was still not done quickly enough, and within days Seoul was captured and the North Koreans were soon pushing towards the port of Busan. Now it was 29 countries who came to the aid of the United Nations, and 90% of these troops were American, yet when they came face to face with the North Koreans on the 5th of July 1950, they were forced to retreat even further to the south, where they became trapped on the southeastern tip of the peninsula. Now this meant that at this point the South were in a very, very bad position. However, it was General Douglas MacArthur who managed to get them out of this position when he managed to launch an ambitious landing at Incheon. Now this meant that MacArthur was successful in forcing North Korean troops back along the 38th parallel. Now with this American success, Stalin was close to accepting a loss if it was not for the 300,000 Chinese troops that Mao sent over the Yalu River in October. Now this Chinese intervention meant that once again the US and South Korean troops were on the retreat, and by mid-December Truman ordered an evacuation from the North Korean port of Hungnam. Now this evacuation was successful, however the Chinese advances continued, and by January 1951 they had captured Seoul and the UN had condemned them as an aggressor. Now this meant that MacArthur demanded that US forces should push into North Korea and use airstrikes and nuclear weapons as a defense. Now for this reason, as Truman strongly detested the use of nuclear weapons at this point, he was fired. Now by June 1951, it was clear that the US wanted a peace settlement, and for the next 2 years, neither side launched any massive military opposition. So the negotiations for the peace settlement started in July 1951, yet they were not concluded until July 1953. And one of the reasons for this was the fact that Rhee wanted the US to conclude greater ties with South Korea, and Stalin also saw many advantages in drawing out the war and keeping America occupied in Asia. Now this meant that they were able to conclude this peace settlement when Stalin died in March 1953, because his immediate successor, Georgy Malenkov, was more willing to forge a peace treaty. Now the armistice was signed at Panmunjom, and it confirmed that there was to be a demilitarized area 2 kilometers off a military demarcation line, which is similar to the 38th parallel, and all military forces would withdraw to their respective territories, and prisoners of war would be returned to their place of origin. Now there were also many positive but also negative impacts to the war. Now some of the positive included the long-term security for Korea, and although this was insecure, there was a sort of plan in place. The US also managed to secure the security of Taiwan, which would stay under nationalist control, and China would not be able to absorb the island. However, there was far more negatives, and one of the main negatives was the fact that 2.8 million people died, and this was both military and civilians. And another thing for Eastern Europe was because of the huge economic pressure of the war placed on the USSR, Stalin accelerated the industrialization of Eastern Europe, which ultimately led to a reduction of consumer goods and initiated some revolt against the communist regime in Eastern Europe. Now, West Germany were also able to rearm, and elements of uncertainty in Europe were developed. So thank you for watching, and see you soon. Bye.